Welcome to the Corner Office. I'm Eric Torigian, and it's glad to have you back. We have an incredible session set up for you today. I know everyone remembers Matt Turnbull, my co-host on the Corner Office podcast, and we have the pleasure of having Liz Schehl with us today. And we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is adaptability. I'm not going to steal anyone's thunder and get too deep into it, but I'd like to start out with Matt. You want to have a chance to introduce yourself, and then you can introduce Liz.
Well, certainly. And Eric, once again, thank you for the privilege and the opportunity to be part of the podcast from the Corner Office. And when we first set this up, I was excited because you and I have talked a lot about adaptability and how in the constantly changing environment of the workplace, things that are really required for people to succeed and thrive. And with that topic coming out, I thought there was no better person to have for a discussion than Liz Schehl. And I'll let Liz introduce herself, but I'll offer this too, is that over the course of many years, I've had the opportunity and privilege to work with Liz on some projects and some initiatives. And she is terrific, absolutely terrific, especially when it comes to not just working directly with teams and organizations with coaching and consulting, but I think she is a futurist, if I can use that term, looking at where things are going, or, we're in Michigan, so hockey analogies often come up, is seeing where the puck is going, not where the puck is at this point. So Liz, I'll ask you to just take a second to give a little bit about yourself. And then I know we want to respect everybody's time here, so we'll start talking about adaptability from there.
Well, first of all, thank you both for having me on. And that was a tremendous introduction. I'm humbled, but I'm a consultant and coach, and most of my work is typically with leaders and teams who are navigating a lot of growth, change, uncertainty. And that's especially true because what I've found more recently is that the path is not always as linear as it used to be. And most of my work centers around really this one big idea, which is that the leaders who thrive aren't necessarily the ones who come in thinking they have all the answers, but they're ones that are willing to be adaptable. They're asking different questions. And from some of the work that Matt and I have done, Matt knows that two of my favorite questions are what if and why. I've said that quite a bit on some of these types of podcasts. But those are the two questions that actually led me to explore more about this idea of adaptability and subsequently the AQ model and AQ assessment, because those are things that I think help give some additional language and structure to a lot of what we've been feeling, regardless of the industry. Change is evolving, and whether that's technology, whether that's the people, processes, legislation, there's just so much that disrupts our world, and it's just an important topic and basically a critical skill that we can't ignore anymore.
Yeah. Well, Liz, and with so much that's out there, and I know we get bombarded all the time, it can give people, PTSD. There's change all around. Things are flipping, and then you turn on the radio or the news, and it scares everybody. But when we talk about leadership, and we both, all of us, spend a lot of time working with leaders, to say, what sets that apart? What really is going to be getting leaders to be able to lead through change and not just kind of be those reactive based clones. What do you see out there?
Yeah, well, I think this idea, and I shared this analogy a little bit with you guys, but it reminded me of that old riddle of Pete and repeat, right? So you think about when Pete and repeat are in a boat, Pete jumps out and who's left, and you just repeat, right? And it's probably the most frustrating and challenging thing for me personally. I hate having that same answer over and over again. But it struck me that that's what a lot of organizations are operating from. It's this idea that the world is changing all around us, and yet we still sometimes anchor to similar philosophies and processes because we're comfortable with it. It's familiar. And what we need to be able to do is empower our teams to be able to think a little bit differently, think outside the box, ask some of those different questions. And, adaptability begins when we stop, referring and defaulting to our habits, behaviors, and patterns. And we start kind of opening our perspective into designing something new. And that requires a different way of thinking and leading about how we empower our teams to explore this. And also having some self-ownership. I kind of like to call it the CEO of you, of really exploring where could I possibly be getting in my own way. And, so I think there's a lot that is shifting in the landscape, and it's one, being able to recognize that, and two, saying, what about the process or situation that we're in isn't feeling right, isn't giving us the momentum and forward motion that we need to change whatever it is that we're trying to fix.
Okay.
One
Well,
of the things we talk a lot about in the labor relations space, especially, is how are we adapting our policies and handbooks and contracts to the current day and the current state. Can you cross over on how you're using adaptability as a personal leader into how we can put adaptability around policies and programs?
Yes, absolutely. That is such a fantastic question because as a leader from an individual perspective, right, we have to, like I mentioned before, really look at things like resilience, mental flexibility, unlearning. And so we've got to be able to, one, recognize where there are some issues and challenges that we're facing, identify those. And then as we're starting to look at the policies and procedures, there's a lot of data and perspective that's been coming through around where people are struggling within these types of environments. And what we found is that, adaptability is something that is going to lead to higher performance, 16% higher performance, as a matter of fact, 32% more commitment to their roles and responsibilities. And we're trying to reduce burnout and overwhelm. And to do some of these things, we've got to be able to understand what is it that they are struggling with. And it's having some really good open conversations and dialogue and putting structures in place where people have an opportunity to share, like, here's some ideas, here's what's working, here are the things that I'm struggling with, and being able to address those in a more open way, which a lot of people are calling that idea of psychological safety. So addressing programs where we can help train them to become more agile, more adaptable. But first we have to be able to recognize what within adaptability are they struggling with. And that's something where the AQ assessment is a really good way to unpack that, because it stems from both their personal challenges as well as from organizational or environmental challenges with respect to team dynamics, systems, processes, and tools.
Yeah, Eric, you bring up a point too, and for the audience today, so many of you are involved directly in HR or else on the labor side of things as well. But I recognize that classically we all have day jobs, right? And we come into work and we have to work, we work in our channel and we're buried. I say we're buried, we're busy all the time. So often it's hard for us to stick our head up, look around and see what else is going on. And you, Liz, you said, be the CEO of you. That's all of us on an individual standpoint. But can you take us through, because let's really talk about how we can use the AQ model, not just for our personal selves necessarily, but to really expand it from somebody who is in a leadership role or someone who's in charge of an HR team. And where do you see the ability to really bring this into either bring awareness or else ultimately, as we always talk about with adaptability, introduce change?
Yeah, it's interesting because when we think about change, it's something that I think a lot of people have had a hard time being able to articulate, how they feel about it or what it is that's causing them to feel like they're struggling. And so what I've found with a lot of assessments, and this one in particular with respect to change, is it helps put some language and structure around things that we might be thinking or feeling, but we're just not really quite sure about how to articulate or express them in the right way. So one, I think it gives some structure around that for people to be able to speak to what it is that they're challenged with. And so when you're looking at it from how you can leverage it with teams, what I've found is that just a quick overview of the framework. So the assessment is actually broken down into 3 different areas. One is the ability, which are some of the skills and tools that you can use to increase your adaptability, things like unlearning, grit, resilience. The second part is the character, which is how and why someone adapts. And that's really where it talks more about kind of your personal motivators. So when you're challenged, what are some things that you naturally lean to or respond with emotionally or in terms of your reaction to change? And being able to understand where someone's coming from, that really opens the door in terms of how we can better support them individually as teams and get some perspective on where we can leverage their strengths to help drive and support change. And then finally, it's the external environmental factors, which are things like team dynamics, company support, work stress, all areas that from an organizational perspective really provide a lens into what are some things from an organizational level that we can be focused on to help people more effectively navigate through change, because these are things that we might not have control over. And yet, even if we don't have control of some of these factors, what we then can start to train to from taking the organization to the individual is, what is our response to those? And how can we help people better deal and navigate their response and reaction to, so it's not prohibitive, but something they can kind of reframe into opportunities, or just better deal with that, regardless of what the situation.
Yeah. Liz, when you talk about having people, reflect and being able to develop or change a little bit, one of the elements to AQ, and maybe we jump so quickly into the deep end here, we can talk more about when we talk about AQ. It's an assessment. It's the assessment that people take, much like an EQ or a DISC or Myers-Briggs. But one of the things with when we talk with AQ is being able to then look at it from the thing that it's not static, is it? It's something that we can actually develop and modify over time.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, I'll give an example. There's a team that I was working with, and one of the things that comes from the AQ assessment is something that's known as grit. And grit is our ability to pursue our goals and have goal achievement. But it's also aligned with our hobbies, interests, and passions. And in this particular situation, they were looking to do a crossover to move someone from one part of the organization to the other that she was looking to pursue. And what was interesting is, while she was a pretty adaptable person, when we reassessed her after that role change, because that's the direction she wanted to go, her grit levels were tremendously improved. So it gives perspective in terms of, again, what are some things that people are perhaps not necessarily in the right role, fit, responsibility. And so it really gives some specific ways to coach and look for opportunities for individuals that also then subsequently benefits the team or organization.
How about, we're doing all this work, and as coaches, I know all three of us work a lot with individuals. So we're going through a situation and we're working with someone. And then all of a sudden we get these land shifts where everything changes. As my old boss used to say, there's a new calculus all of a sudden. How do we help people over that using AQ?
Yeah, it's a great question, Eric. So I think the thing I would say is, the important thing is not evading the reality of what your current situation is. So I think it's important to acknowledge what that is that has shifted and changed. I think it's getting first an opportunity to understand people's reactions and responses to it. And then what the AQ assessment can do is, as you start to unpack, and I know we don't have a ton of time to go into the details of what the assessment reveals, but you can really hone in on things like, is this something where someone might struggle more with getting comfortable with doing something that's outside of the norm from a process, where they have to unlearn something that they do day to day as a behavior, a tool, or something along those lines. It can also help us think more about leveraging a growth mindset. How do we help them shift perhaps from saying, oh my gosh, this is something that we've got to do. Everything shifted below us. The world is on fire, and this is terrible. To, all right, well, let's reframe that. How can we look at these things as opportunities? What are some things that we have to kind of shift? How do we prioritize some work? And how do we then start setting things like micro goals to help us and celebrate the journey of getting from point A to point B. So it doesn't feel quite so overwhelming. But what the AQ assessment does is it reveals what are some of the triggers as an individual, as a team, that are showing up, so you can really pinpoint and hone in on specific things to focus on that all support and help develop the skills of adaptability.
And Eric, I always look at, going back to our youth, we talked about the Pete and repeat, but I thought, as you were mentioning that, Liz, I immediately thought of the Chicken Little syndrome, which is anytime a change is suggested, the sky is falling, that's the big thing. Or else, the old Saturday Night Live skit of Debbie Downer, who anytime someone proposes it, it's like, oh, it's never going to work. Oh my gosh, here's the change. It's magnified as people, to show examples of human nature. But in doing so, the great thing about this is we can actually offer and have people assess to recognize when that might flare up. And more importantly, Liz, then it gives you that roadmap or the opportunity for them to say, if this is how you normally respond, let's try some of these other things, as you said, micro goals, and chipping away at it to get over, to get more comfortable with the change that's out there. which leads to better embracing and better outcomes. You mentioned some statistics at the beginning, and I think it's really important because we have HR people on this team, right? Burnout, and anytime you have to replace a person because they resign or retire or their performance takes them out, there's more work associated with that. So Liz, you mentioned statistically a few things. Do you mind sharing them again, just so that we can say, hey, this is something that's been proven. There's the data behind it, and talk about again those statistics. I'll throw it out that way, data points.
Yeah. So and again, to reinforce that, I think what I love and what I'm most attracted about to this assessment is that it is something that can be actionable. So you reiterated that, and I think that's a really important thing. It's not just about the awareness; it's about creating the actions and ideas and strategies to help support and drive all of the things that we're talking about. So it's putting something into practice, not just having the awareness of it. And that, again, that's something that you can measure and reassess. And what the data has shown and what they found is that when someone is, thriving with emotionally, which is one of the things that we do measure. And when we say thriving emotionally, they define that as, to what degree am I showing up to work feeling really good, feeling like I'm supported, feeling like I have opportunities. And what they found is that if they score highly in that category of thriving emotionally, then that leads to a 16% increase in performance, a 32% greater commitment, so retention, and then 125% less likely to burn out. And the burnout is something that is one of the most significant contributors, which we see show up in one of the categories, which is work stress. And I'll just give a quick little example here. So when you find people who are in the same team with different variations of work stress, especially if they're in the same role, again, these are little indicators of things where you can say, what does the work distribution look like, or the workload? Are people just not efficient, or is it distributed, unevenly, where someone is taking on more of the role than they should? Is it just that it's a season, right? So there's certain things you can start to unpack and say, how can we start putting some insights and perspective to drive the decision-making on how you move the actions forward? So again, it's really taking and giving it more of this lens. So rather than just looking at it as like a quick x-ray, you're going more down into a deeper dive MRI that basically is saying, let's really hone in and focus on the specific areas that we know are going to give us immediate lift and opportunity to help people navigate more effectively through change.
Yeah, and I think it also helps, as you said, eliminate some of the blind spots. When you talk about the environment, that subcategory of environment, Liz and I have done a lot of these assessments with organizations and with people. And I always ask her, I go, what do you look at first? And I always, for some reason, look at the environment thing, because I think it tells a lot of whether or not they're in quote, in a happy space. If there's a ton of work stress, if they don't feel the company supports them, if the team doesn't have support, it leads them down to like low emotional health. And we know that has an impact on staff and staffing. So from a leadership standpoint, from a departmental standpoint, AQ can really give you some deep insights to whether or not there are some institutional issues or problems out there, and being able to then perhaps nip them in the bud. And Eric, no, go ahead. Did you have a question, or were you going to add something there too?
No, you made me think of something there too, is because I see this a lot, and we've talked about this a lot. And this is actually a very common labor relations topic or concept, is that you could have multiple people in an organization view the organization completely differently. And I think this gives us a set of language, or to me, this is the English language. Well, the English language is good to have, but these great works of art that have been written in it are better to have. So I think it's good to have this common language. But now if we can break it down and say, hey, someone who measures this way on AQ tends to have this kind of a view of your organization. This can help with hiring. This can help with promoting. This can help with leadership development. This can help with negotiations. So I see this more than just a way to help an individual. I see this more with this organizational impact.
Yeah, Eric, and I would just say real quick on that. So I have done some work in this from a hiring perspective as well. Now, what I would say, caveat, right? This isn't a yes or no tool, but again, it provides another lens into the overall process. So I really like to put that caveat. But what I've found, so for example, when you look at the environment, it's a way to help create some very specific questions that you can then ask and follow up with a candidate. So if their team structure and environment is something that they are struggling with, it's a way to drill down and say specifically, well, what about that? Or, doesn't feel right? Or what is it specifically that you don't like that is kind of creating this reason or catalyst for you to leave? And you can start to then see, when you look at the other aspects on the personal side, is it them? Is it the organization, or a combination of both? So then you can start to craft a different set of questions that says, how do you see that changing here? What are you expecting it to be different when you join our organization or you take on this new role? And what ownership do you have to try and make it a success? So if you see things like unlearning are really low, mental flexibility is low, they're not really open to doing something different. It could be the organization was asking them something that they're not ready for, or no one's really developed them to be part and grow in that way. So it could be a combination of both, but it allows you to have a little bit of a different lens and perspective on the questions and what you're looking for potentially in some of the candidates.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy too. And it's never yes or no, right? We spend our whole school, our educational careers seeking yes or no answers and final solutions. And in the real world, it just doesn't exist, and it doesn't work that way, and it shouldn't, right? So a yes or no answer to a hire will really depends. Do you want to use this person to change the culture? Are you trying to find someone who fits the culture? Is this someone who you don't want to burn out? Do you need to challenge other people on the team? Like, there's just so much more that goes into it. And I think the more we can put commonality around our language, the stronger we are as leaders.
Yeah. And Liz, one last thing too, which earlier today you spoke about, that these are muscles, they can be toned and things. One of the things, we do a lot of assessments. A lot of HR groups will say that, oh yeah, we use this assessment and that assessment. And I'm reasonable to know that when we debrief on these assessments and when we're there, people tend to be pretty excited and interested in them. And then they go back to work. And, we suffer the fate of the lower left-hand drawer in the desk where that assessment gets filed away and we don't get to see it anymore. But you mentioned that there is that reassessment. There's the ability to check this stuff. There are steps that you can take within that. What do you see as some of the best methods to ensure that we continue to use this, we continue to reference this, and not just for ourselves maybe, but for teams and for leadership too?
I'm so glad you asked that. I think it's the most often overlooked part of assessments. So especially as we're trying to really elevate culture change and all of these different things that are coming at us, I think that the assessment is a point of measurement, right? It is a great way to uncover what the challenges are, where you can pinpoint and really focus on some core areas. And again, like Eric, you mentioned, it provides really good structure and language on how you might be able to put a plan together to move forward. The way I've seen this work best is, one, having some awareness on what is the assessment telling us and giving some education on the front end so people know going into it, what are they looking at when they see this. The second part is going through and debriefing it and finding a couple of areas where you're going to be able to get some easy wins, lift, that are going to get some traction early on in the organization to gain the buy-in, right? We all know there needs to be buy-in. And then finally, putting together an implementation plan that focuses on those things, like the micro goals or some specific skills, maybe ideation workshops where you're challenging some thinking. There's lots of ways you can put that into action. But I think it's a matter of taking what those are and putting together a plan that says, on a regular basis, we're going to insert this. This is going to become part of our team meetings, our ongoing, planning and workshops that we do. And then subsequently then doing a reassessment, typically no earlier than probably 6 months, because change is something that takes some time, to be able to consistently measure and say, where are we making traction? And if not, it's not the end of the world. Like you said, it's not the Chicken Little situation. It just means that perhaps something that you tried didn't resonate. It's an opportunity to, as you said, Matt, before, fail forward, learn, and continue to ideate, iterate, and adapt, right? And that's the whole point of it.
Yeah, love it. Great conversation. And as we always say on the Lessons from the Corner Office podcast, we always reserve the right to get better. And I think this is a great tool. It's a great way for organizations to get another view of who they are, how they are, and more importantly, how how they can change and act together. So Liz, I want to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Matt, if you had any closing words, Liz, if you had any closing comments.
I'll jump in first. As always, Liz, I have so much fun working with you, so I appreciate you and thank you for coming on. The other side of it too, for people out there listening and thinking about AQ for the first time, probably because it's new. It was just patented in the last 6 months in the U.S. Patent Office, so it is a new assessment out there. But if you're interested, to reach out to us, respond back through Eric's link. But we'll direct it. It'll be directed back to Liz and myself so that we can have a conversation with you and have the ability to tell you more about it, to see what your needs are going to be or if you're interested in this. So we want to make sure then that people have the opportunity to learn more about AQ, most importantly, and then how it can fit in. And Liz, to you, thanks one more time, and closing remarks from you.
Yes, well, I just want to say thank you both so much, and for everyone who's on the call. The only thing I would just close with is this was some advice that I had gotten early on, and it stuck with me. And it's one, to just don't be so fixated on an outcome that you miss other opportunities along the way, because it can lead to tremendous growth and potential. And so that's kind of been my mantra over the last few years, and hopefully that has a little inspiration for you too.
Excellent.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for paying attention to the lessons from the corner office.